Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace lies a story so disturbing, so tangled in secrets, scandals, and reckless behavior, that the public was never meant to hear it. For decades, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson projected the image of an unconventional but harmless partnership. But insiders, staff members, and biographers paint a very different picture, one filled with hidden lovers slipping through royal corridors, explosive confrontations with senior royals, clandestine affairs under the Queen's roof, and a marriage collapsing long before the world realized anything was wrong. This is the truth Andrew and Fergie spent years trying to bury, and it's finally coming out. The announcement landed like an earthquake across Britain. Prince Andrew would no longer be known as a prince. Not in title, not in formality, not in public life. In a single stroke, he reverted to the name he was born with, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a symbolic demotion that carried more weight than any public statement the palace had ever made about him. This was not a temporary suspension or a quiet reduction of duties. This was an erasure. A reminder that even the Queen's son could fall so far from grace that the monarchy itself no longer wished to be associated with his title. But this collapse did not begin with one scandal, one interview, or one catastrophic association. What unfolded before the world in recent years was simply the final chapter of a much older story, a story rooted in decades of recklessness, arrogance, and a marriage that cracked long before the public realized anything was wrong. Andrew's downfall is not a sudden shock, it is the predictable consequence of choices made repeatedly, carelessly, and without accountability. By reverting to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the palace signaled something deeper, that the institution he once represented had reached its limit. And the truth is, his fall cannot be understood without examining the chaotic partnership that shaped so much of his personal life. This is where the unraveling truly begins. When Sarah Ferguson entered royal life, she did so with a burst of enthusiasm that felt refreshing compared to the formality of the monarchy. She believed, naively, perhaps, that marrying the Queen's second son would bring stability, companionship, and a life filled with shared purpose. The public loved her energy, her humor, her refusal to take herself too seriously. She imagined a royal marriage would be a partnership built on presence, loyalty, and mutual support. But the reality she stepped into could not have been further from that dream. Prince Andrew was not simply a royal, he was a Navy officer whose duties took him away for months at a time. In the early years, they were together for little more than 40 days per year, barely enough time to build a marriage, let alone sustain one. Sarah found herself alone in cavernous royal residences, surrounded by staff but suffering from profound emotional isolation. The royal schedule offered no flexibility, no comfort, and no room for vulnerability. Andrew's absences left Sarah feeling abandoned, trapped in a world that expected perfection but offered none of the intimacy she craved. Insiders later admitted that loneliness became her constant companion, quietly pushing her toward desperation. The emotional distance between them didn't just weaken their marriage, it created the perfect conditions for the explosive disasters that followed. Steve Wyatt entered Sarah Ferguson's life at the exact moment her loneliness had reached its peak. A wealthy Texan businessman, confident, polished, and effortlessly charming, Wyatt became everything Andrew wasn't during those long months at sea. Sarah met him at the British Opera Festival in Houston, and what began as a friendly connection quickly grew into something far more intense. Insiders from that time say Sarah was desperately vulnerable, starved for attention and emotional warmth. Wyatt provided that without hesitation. Some biographers even claim she once described him as the love of her life, a statement that may be exaggerated, but one that reveals how deeply she had fallen. For Sarah, Wyatt filled a void she no longer believed her marriage could fix. For Andrew, however, the discovery of their emotional affair was devastating. Up to that point, their marriage had been struggling, strained, distant, bruised by circumstance but still intact. But when Andrew learned the truth, the dynamic between them changed permanently. The hurt was immediate. The trust, already fragile, fractured. And from that point forward, the marriage was no longer simply unstable, it was cracked open, unable to hide the damage. Wyatt eventually moved on, but the emotional fissure he left behind remained. And it was only the beginning of the turmoil to come. As the emotional distance widened, Andrew's behavior towards Sarah shifted dramatically. Biographers and staff members who observed them during this period recount moments that revealed just how strained the marriage had become. One of the most unsettling incidents took place outside Harry's bar in Mayfair. Sarah, heavily pregnant at the time, tripped and fell on the pavement. Instead of stopping, instead of offering a hand or showing even a flicker of concern, Andrew simply kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't pause. He left her to gather herself and catch up alone. For staff who witnessed it, the moment was chilling. This was not the Andrew the public saw waving from balconies or smiling for photographs. This was a man shutting down emotionally, withdrawing with icy detachment just as rumors about Wyatt and Sarah's marriage began to swirl behind palace walls. The more the whispers grew, the colder Andrew became. There were no loud arguments, no dramatic scenes. Just silence. Distance. A chilling indifference that revealed more about their relationship than any tabloid headline ever could. And as these private moments slipped into view, shared quietly by aides, noted by biographers, the couple's polished public facade began to crumble. What had once looked like a modern royal love story now appeared brittle, hollow, and heartbreakingly fractured. If Steve Wyatt was the first crack, John Bryan was the explosion that ripped the marriage apart from the inside. Officially, Bryan was introduced as the helpful advisor managing the commercial side of Sarah's publishing ventures. But behind closed doors, according to multiple biographers, he was far more than a professional associate. Bryan began spending extended time at Sunninghill Park, the marital home gifted to Andrew and Sarah by the Queen, an extraordinary privilege that made what happened next even more shocking. According to Dr. Alan Starkey and other royal chroniclers, Andrew was completely unaware of the true nature of Bryan's presence. While Andrew retired upstairs for the night, Sarah and Bryan would allegedly slip into Andrew's own study, engaging in intimate behavior mere steps away from where the prince had just been. The violation wasn't only marital, it was institutional. It was the crossing of a line so brazen that even seasoned palace insiders struggled to comprehend it. When Lord Charteris, the Queen's former private secretary, was told about the situation, his reaction was instantaneous and furious. He reportedly responded with 3 words that summed up the palace's shock: vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. The scandal didn't just wound Andrew and Sarah, it shattered the monarchy's confidence in them. Trust was broken. Respect was gone. And the royal family began preparing for consequences neither Andrew nor Sarah imagined were coming. If the Sunninghill scandal was the private disgrace, the toe-sucking photographs were the public detonation. Captured in the south of France, the images showed John Bryan intimately kissing Sarah's feet, pictures so explicit, so wildly inappropriate for a senior royal's wife, that they sent shockwaves across the globe. Overnight, the scandal moved from whispers behind palace walls to front-page humiliation. The monarchy was blindsided. The damage was immediate. But the real drama unfolded inside the palace. According to recent biographies, Princess Anne took the lead in confronting Sarah at a private dinner. Anne, known for her bluntness, discipline, and intolerance for foolish behavior, delivered what insiders describe as a ferocious reprimand. She criticized Sarah's judgment, her recklessness, and the humiliation she had brought upon the entire family. Not one person at that table defended Sarah. Not Andrew. Not a single relative. The isolation was total. Instead of accepting responsibility, Sarah reportedly blamed photographers, editors, and the press. She acted, according to witnesses, as if she were the victim rather than the architect of her own downfall. The lack of accountability infuriated the royals even further. This confrontation marked a breaking point. It was the moment the family realized Sarah was no longer simply struggling, she had become a liability. And from that day forward, the path toward separation was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. While Sarah Ferguson's indiscretions dominated newspapers and tabloids, Andrew's private life told a parallel story, one whispered behind palace doors rather than broadcast to the world. Biographers and former staff claim that within the first year of marriage, Andrew allegedly engaged with more than a dozen women, a staggering number that insiders say went largely unmentioned publicly. These were not fleeting encounters documented for gossip, they were patterns of behavior observed and recorded by those close to the couple. Drivers, protection officers, and household staff have recounted a constant stream of women appearing in Andrew's orbit during his social life at the height of his public duties. Some of these women were reportedly escorts, entering Buckingham Palace with little or no background checks, minimal documentation, and no understanding of who they were or why they were allowed in. For a senior royal, this was more than reckless, it was a serious breach of protocol and security. Yet unlike Sarah, Andrew's affairs were quietly contained, handled discreetly behind closed doors to preserve the monarchy's image. the contrast could not have been starker. Sarah's scandals were splashed across front pages, Andrew's were quietly noted in diaries and internal memos. Yet the effect on their marriage was identical: trust eroded, boundaries shattered, and the foundation of their union weakened. Together, these hidden patterns built a silent storm that would eventually destroy them both. By 1992, the marriage between Andrew and Sarah had reached a point of no return. While the public still clung to images of royal smiles and appearances, the reality behind closed doors was grim. Andrew reportedly phoned Sarah that year, telling her the marriage was over. The moment was devastating for her. Sources described Sarah bursting into tears, overwhelmed and heartbroken. The emotional toll was profound, not just from the ending of a partnership, but from the realization that the forces around them, the palace itself, had orchestrated the separation. The most crucial detail is that Andrew's decision was not entirely his own. Senior royal figures had reportedly lost patience. The marriage, already strained by affairs, distance, and reckless choices on both sides, had become untenable in the eyes of those responsible for the monarchy's reputation. The message was clear: the public announcement was inevitable, and there was no room left for private reconciliation. 4 years later, in 1996, the divorce was finalized. Yet, unlike most couples, their separation did not mean an end to their intertwined lives. They continued living at Royal Lodge, raising their daughters together, and appearing publicly in ways that confused the media and the public alike. The divorce ended the romantic aspect of their relationship, but their connection, complicated, enduring, and fraught with secrets, persisted, shaping the narrative of their lives for decades to come. After their 1996 divorce, Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew shocked the world by continuing to live together at Royal Lodge, a sprawling estate gifted by the Queen. They holidayed together, raised their daughters side by side, and appeared at public events as if nothing had changed. Outsiders struggled to understand this arrangement, dubbing them the happiest divorced couple, yet the truth was far darker than the media narrative. Their cohabitation did not reflect love or romance, it reflected mutual dependency, a complicated bond forged through decades of mistakes, secrets, and public humiliation. Observers suggest several reasons for their unusual arrangement. Comfort in familiarity may have outweighed the need for independence. Dependency, financial, emotional, and social, kept them tethered to one another. And perhaps most importantly, staying together protected deeper truths from spilling into the public eye, shielding the monarchy from further embarrassment. Their routines, interactions, and careful management of appearances created a bizarre semblance of normalcy, defying royal expectations for decades. To the outside world, it was almost comical, two divorced parents maintaining an image of happiness under one roof. Yet insiders knew the stakes were higher. This strange, intertwined life was less about reconciliation and more about survival, a mutual shelter in the storm of scandal that surrounded them at every turn. This end marks the final chapter in a story of ambition, privilege, and repeated misjudgment. For years, they manipulated appearances. To the outside world, it was almost comical, two divorced parents maintaining an image of happiness under one roof. Yet insiders knew the stakes were higher. This strange, intertwined life was less about reconciliation and more about survival, a mutual shelter in the storm of scandal that surrounded them at every turn. This end marks the final chapter in a story of ambition, privilege, and repeated misjudgment. For years, they manipulated appearances, maintained illusions of control, and defied expectations. Now, with their titles, residences, and public standing stripped, only the reality of consequences remains. And as this saga closes, insiders warn that the repercussions of their reckless past may not yet be fully realized, hinting at a next chapter that could expose even darker truths.